Let's get right into it. Welcome to this rigorous explainer detailing the international laws that govern exactly how ships interact with our marine environment. To sum it up in one sentence, we are mapping the international legal frameworks for ships. And this absolutely matters because global trade literally cannot operate without unified rules to prevent ecological collapse. We're going to treat this like a self-contained masterclass today, so grab a notebook and let's dive in. Okay, here is our agenda for today. We're covering 1. Vessel source pollution in MARPOL, 2. Double hulls in special areas, 3. Dumping and the London Convention, 4. Atmospheric pollution regulations, 5. The IMO Net Zero Framework, and finally, 6. We'll do a structured course recap. Section 1. Vessel source pollution and MARPOL. Let's start with the everyday waste generated just by running a ship, and the foundational treaty designed to control it all. Think about your own home for a second. Just by living in it, you generate wastewater, garbage, and emissions, right? Well, a massive cargo ship is essentially a floating city that does the exact same thing. In plain language, it's just the everyday mess of operating a vessel. But legally, we call this operational discharge. And when we talk about this everyday operational waste, the precise legal framework we are operating under is MARPOL 73/78. That stands for the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships. It was originally adopted in 1973 and then modified by a crucial protocol in 1978. It's basically the absolute cornerstone of marine environmental law. Now, MARPOL organizes this pollution into 6 very specific annexes. Annex I deals with oil. Annex II covers noxious liquid substances in bulk, like chemicals. Annex III handles harmful packaged substances, focusing on strict packaging and documentation. Annex IV regulates sewage. But I really want you to pay special attention to Annex V. That one governs garbage. And today, it functions as a near-total ban on discharging plastics into the sea. And finally, there's Annex V, which covers air pollution and was added a bit later. Take a mental snapshot of these 6 categories because they form the baseline for everything else we'll discuss. Moving on to Section 2, double hulls and special areas. Let's examine how catastrophic disasters actually force these specific annexes to evolve, particularly looking at Annex I. You see, laws are very often written in the wake of disaster. Let's look at the infamous Exxon Valdez case from 1989. Here are the facts. A massive oil tanker struck a reef, tearing open its single-layer hull, causing one of the worst environmental disasters in history. The legal issue here was single-hull vulnerability, the harsh realization that just one layer of steel was entirely insufficient to protect the marine environment from the cargo. The holding, or the resulting international regulatory fix, was that MARPOL Annex I was heavily amended. If you're wondering how that fix works, you can think of a double hull like a giant thermos for crude oil. Just like your thermos has an inner wall holding your coffee and an outer wall to protect it if you drop it, a double hull gives ships a protective, empty space between the ocean and the oil tanks. If a ship hits a reef, the outer hull breaks, but the inner tank stays totally intact. Now, that analogy is great for picturing it, but we need to learn the actual law. So the precise legal rule is that MARPOL Annex I strictly requires double hull construction for all new tankers, and it dramatically accelerates the phase-out of existing single-hull vessels. This is mandated to substantially reduce the risk of a major spill from a hull breach. The analogy helps you visualize it, but this is the regulatory mandate you absolutely must remember. Furthermore, Annex I recognizes that not all oceans are created equal. It designates special areas, places like the Mediterranean, the Baltic, the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Aden. Because these zones are exceptionally ecologically sensitive or just have incredibly heavy ship traffic, they get much tighter discharge standards than the open ocean. And these aren't just polite suggestions. They are fiercely enforced through the Port State Control Framework, meaning local authorities actually inspect the vessels docking in their ports and penalize violations. All right, Section 3. Dumping, the London Convention. Let's make a really sharp distinction here between everyday operational discharge and the deliberate disposal of waste at sea. In maritime law, the word dumping has a highly specific definition, and it's legally distinct from that ordinary operational discharge we just learned about under MARPOL. If operational discharge is the incidental wastewater from your sink, dumping is like driving a dump truck full of trash to the edge of a cliff and pushing it off. It means the deliberate disposal of waste as a disposal method, literally using the sea as a dumping ground. The rules for this come from the London Convention of 1972 and its 1996 protocol.
The evolution between these two treaties illustrates a massive conceptual shift. The 1972 convention used a blacklist/gray list approach. Basically, dumping anything was generally allowed, unless it was on a specific blacklist of banned substances, like radioactive waste. But the 1996 London Protocol completely flipped the script. Under the protocol, dumping of everything is strictly prohibited, except for a very short, specific permitted list, things like dredged geological material or fish waste, and even those need a rigorous permit assessment.
So, what exactly do we call this huge shift? Going from allowing everything by default to banning everything by default is known as the precautionary principle, translated directly into concrete regulatory architecture. Simply put, when in doubt about environmental harm, the law now defaults to prohibition. That is a foundational concept. To see how this framework adapts to modern times, look at a fascinating 2013 amendment to the London Protocol. It specifically regulates ocean fertilization. That's a process where you deliberately add iron or nutrients to the ocean to stimulate plankton growth, which then sucks up carbon dioxide. By legally classifying this as a form of regulated dumping, the law provided a direct regulatory response to emerging and highly controversial climate geoengineering proposals. Moving right along to Section 4, Atmospheric Pollution Regulations. We're shifting our focus from the water up into the air, exploring the rules housed under MARPOL Annex V. MARPOL Annex VI is where we deal with atmospheric pollution. The absolute game changer here is the landmark 2020 Global Sulfur Cap for Sulfur Oxides, or SOx. This rule ruthlessly slashed the permissible sulfur content in marine fuel from 3.5% down to 0.5% globally, and an even stricter 0.1% inside specific emission control areas. This single mandate forced the whole global shipping industry to pivot rapidly, adopting low-sulfur fuels, installing expensive exhaust scrubbers, or switching to LNG propulsion. The Annex also sets tiered standards for nitrogen oxides, or NOx, based on engine build dates, and it completely prohibits the deliberate emission of ozone-depleting substances. Let's hit Section 5, the IMO Net Zero Framework. Now we enter the most current and complex frontier of shipping regulation, the International Maritime Organization's push for decarbonization. When you hear about upcoming climate regulations for shipping, you might be wondering, is this framework just a flat carbon tax on all ships? That'd be simple, right? You burn a ton of fuel, you pay a flat fee. But legally, no, it's not a flat tax at all. The precise rule under the IMO Net Zero Framework applies what is called a greenhouse gas fuel intensity, or GFI, metric. This is measured well to wake, meaning from the moment the fuel is extracted all the way through to its combustion. It applies to massive ocean-going ships over 5,000 gross tonnage. It functions as a global fuel standard combined with a pricing mechanism. So if a ship exceeds its GFI threshold, it has to pay into a central fund. Don't let the loose analogy of a carbon tax overwrite the actual legal rule of the GHG fuel intensity standard. Now, this framework is a live, unresolved legal story. It was approved as a draft back at MEPC 8.3 in April 2025. However, the formal adoption vote, scheduled for October 2025, got postponed by a full year due to heavy geopolitical pushback from states like the US and Saudi Arabia. That forced a compromise at MEPC 84 in early 2026, keeping the framework as a reference point, with an anticipated resumption of the vote at MEPC 85 in November 2026. If it's adopted then, the absolute earliest it would enter into force is March 2028. The main tension causing all these delays revolves around a foundational concept called Common but Differentiated Responsibilities, or CBDR. The core of the current negotiation isn't really about the emissions targets themselves. It's about the money. How will the revenue generated from those exceeding ships actually get distributed? The CBDR principle dictates that the transition has to be fair. That means funds should be used to protect developing and small island states from disproportionate economic harm during the global shift to green shipping. Finally, Section 6, our structured course recap. We've covered a massive amount of legal architecture today, so let's lock in these concepts and make sure you have the terminology absolutely mastered. We started with MARPOL 73/78, the foundational treaty for operational vessel source pollution, which categorizes waste into the 6 annexes, including Annex V's strict ban on plastics. We looked at the Exxon Valdez disaster, which legally forced the double hull requirement into Annex I, and we noted the even stricter regulations inside special areas. We then defined dumping, contrasting the allow everything approach of the 1972 London Convention with the ban everything approach of the 1996 London Protocol, a perfect illustration of the precautionary principle. Moving up to the air, we noted Annex V's monumental 2020 global sulfur cap. And finally, we mapped the live negotiations of the IMO net zero framework, its GFI metric, and the CBDR principle driving those talks to ensure a fair transition. As we wrap up this chronological blueprint of maritime law, I'll leave you with this to think about. Can these complex international treaties actually evolve fast enough to catch up with our rapidly changing global environmental reality? Thanks so much for learning with me today.